Welcome to HRConnect's update on Teachers' Pay, September 2022. This presentation will provide you with the key information you need to be aware of in relation to teachers' pay for this academic year. We will recap on the key principles and rules in relation to teachers' pay as set out in the School Teachers' Pay and Conditions document. We will have a look at the Teachers' Pay Framework and the flexibility schools have in managing pay decisions and pay progression. We will then take a look at the key features of the school pay policy and how this should be reviewed year on year. We will then run through the key changes in the 2022 pay award and look at how these might be implemented in your school. We will revisit the advisory pay points which were reintroduced in 2020 for the main pay range and upper pay range, and in 2021 for the unqualified range which schools may choose to adopt. Finally, we will run through a checklist of the actions schools will need to take in managing their pay decisions for teachers. Firstly, let us recap on some of the key principles in relation to teachers' pay. As you may be aware, teachers are employed on national terms and conditions. These requirements are set out in the School Teachers' Pay and Conditions document, which is updated annually with any changes being effective from the 1st of September. The provisions of the Stpcd are mandatory for teachers employed in maintained schools and form part of their statutory conditions of service. Should a maintained school breach these provisions, it would actually be a breach of contract. For academies, there is no absolute obligation to follow the Stpcd. However, under the 2P provisions, those teachers who were employed in the academy at the point of transfer from a maintained school transfer under the terms of Stpcd. New staff employed post-academy transfer may be employed on locally agreed terms, although most academies have continued to honour Stpcd provisions for these staff. In 2013-14, the provisions of the Stpcd were substantially revised, allowing for greater flexibility with regards to pay. And these are the provisions we continue to follow in 2022. It is worth drawing to your attention a couple of sentences from the DfE guidance document called Implementing Your School's Approach to Pay, which really underlines the government's intention when it comes to local flexibility with regards to teachers' pay. No single approach will suit all schools. It is not expected that all schools will follow the same framework for pay progression. Not intended for a uniform annual uplift. It is not expected that each school will apply the same level of increase, and it's for the school to determine the principles or framework they will follow and the amount of increase they apply each year. There are a number of key features of the Stpcd pay provisions to be aware of. Pay progression for all teachers is based on evidence of performance as demonstrated through the appraisal process. Prior to 2013, pay progression was based only on length of service, but since this date, performance-related pay for all teachers is a requirement. Good performance should allow for the teacher to progress year on year to the top of their pay range. The Stpcd does not define in any detail what good performance looks like, so there is scope for schools to define and refine performance expectations locally. The nature and context of schools vary, so it is really important to consider what factors constitute good performance in your setting. Pay progression criteria should be documented within the school pay policy, and all staff should be aware of these performance expectations. Every teacher with service of at least 26 weeks in the previous academic year by the 1st of September each year is entitled to an annual pay review. The 26 weeks do not need to be continuous or full weeks. Individual days or half sessions count, so days worked on supply count where a teacher is directly employed by the school, as do any periods on sick leave or family leave. It's important to note that whilst a teacher with service in 26 weeks is entitled to a pay review, pay progression is not automatic, and the teacher still needs to meet those criteria for pay progression defined in your school pay policy. Pay progression can be withheld when a teacher is not meeting performance expectations. The teacher's performance does not necessarily need to be managed via the school's capability process to do this, but there needs to be clear evidence of where the teacher is failing to meet the pay progression criteria, and there should have been prior conversations about any shortcomings so there are no end-of-year surprises. You may be aware that there are two pay ranges for qualified classroom teachers, main and upper. Movement to the upper pay range is not automatic once the teacher reaches the top of the main pay range, but requires them to apply and demonstrate an additional level of competence. Being highly competent in the teacher's standards and making a substantial and sustained wider contribution to the school. Again, it is for the school to define what this looks like locally and set this out in their pay policy. A couple of other features to draw your attention to. When a teacher moves between schools, there is no requirement under the Stpcd to match the salary received previously, although there are likely to be good reasons to do so to attract strong candidates. Technically, it is possible for a teacher to be paid on the upper pay range in their current school and for the recruiting school to define their role as main pay range only and offer a salary on that basis. Prior to 2014, there was a requirement to match salaries, and often teachers and recruiting managers are of the incorrect belief that they still need to do so, hence flagging this for you. Importantly though, an upper or main pay range teacher can't be paid less within the same school. There is no provision to step down to a lower pay scale or move to a lower salary. Any backwards move would technically mean the school is in breach of contract, even if the employee were to initiate this themselves or agree to the change. We will now look in more detail at the specific arrangements for teachers' pay. National pay ranges for teachers are published within the Stpcd. These ranges are mandatory for maintained schools and discretionary for academies. Within the Stpcd, the minimum and maximum values are published for each of the pay ranges shown on the slide. These minimum and maximum values are reviewed annually by the DfE and a percentage uplift is applied. The percentage varies year on year. Sometimes the same percentage uplift is applied to all the ranges, top and bottom. But often different percentage increases are applied to different ranges, or the bottom of the range may increase at a different percentage rate to the top of the range. Any uplift is applied from the 1st of September and confirmed when the Stpcd for that academic year is published. Schools are required to pay within the minimum and maximum values for the pay range. To pay outside of this would be a breach of contract. In 2014, mandatory pay points were removed from the Stpcd. This was to give schools greater flexibility to determine how pay progression operated locally and what year-on-year increases were awarded. However, since 2020, advisory pay points have been reintroduced for the main and upper pay ranges, and last year advisory points were reintroduced for unqualified teachers too. As yet, there are no advisory points published for leadership teachers. It's important to note that while the unions remain clear advocates of a pay point approach and have been quite strong in encouraging schools to adopt these, there is no absolute requirement to do so. These arrangements mean that schools have scope to define locally the pay progression framework they use and determine the amount they award in pay progression locally. Our model pay policy and guidance sets out some alternative pay progression frameworks which schools may wish to consider, including the continued use of an incremental points-based framework. Finally, it is important to highlight the use of careful pay budgeting and modelling to ensure whichever approach to pay you take remains affordable over the medium term. We will now take a look at the requirements for the school's pay policy. Every school is required to have a written pay policy and for this to be reviewed annually. This annual review is really important because you need to ensure any actions you take are consistent with the policy, otherwise the school is in danger of being in breach of its own stated procedure. Given the flexibilities and scope for local discretion, the school's pay policy is a key document setting out the school's approach to teachers' pay and pay progression. It is vital that the pay policy clearly documents the school's approach and also that in practice the school follows any commitments or principles set out in the policy. For our customers, our model pay policy provides a framework for this, but there are some important decisions which the school must make locally and document in their pay policy. You can see these on the slide and we will look at each point in turn. Criteria for pay progression. For each of the pay ranges, schools should define what good performance looks like. These criteria should reflect the different expectations for each of the pay ranges. For example, you would of course expect the expectations for leadership teachers to be quite different to those for an early career stage teacher. Minimum and maximum values for the pay ranges should be stated in the pay policy and updated annually in line with the national rates published in the Stpcd. Schools should detail the pay framework they have chosen to adopt and explain how pay progression will be awarded where performance meets the required expectations. For example, this may be through the use of incremental points or a percentage increase or a cash increase. The precise level of increase would then be determined annually by the school. These principles are unlikely to change annually, but the school may choose to review the approach periodically. The school should specify annually the amount to be awarded in pay progression. This will need to be reviewed and updated annually. For example, where a school adopts an incremental points approach, the school will need to update the value of the points to be used within the pay policy, or where a percentage increase is applied, the school will need to determine the value annually. The pay policy should also specify any delegation arrangements. For example, are pay decisions made by the head teacher or governing body or a committee of the governing body? Are pay recommendations made by the appraiser or head teacher? And who hears pay appeals? A school's pay policy should be reviewed annually once any pay award for the year has been confirmed and published in the Stpcd. Depending on the governing body structure, this review may be undertaken by the whole governing body or pay committee. The review should consider the budget available for pay progression and how this should be distributed. In deciding how much to award where performance warrants pay progression, the principles set out in the pay policy should be followed. It's also a good opportunity to consider whether any pay progression criteria contained within the policy is fit for purpose, or whether the school wishes to review the pay progression framework for the forthcoming pay and appraisal cycle. Any pay values stated within the policy should also be updated, including updating the value of any points where these are used. Once the pay policy has been reviewed, we would always advise consulting with staff and unions on any revisions. The nature of the consultation may vary depending on the size of the school and nature or scale of revisions. But as a general rule, we recommend allowing 2 to 3 weeks for staff and unions to lodge any comments. As a minimum, consultation should be with staff and any school-based union reps. For consultation to be meaningful, you need to ensure the school gives careful consideration to any comments raised and then provide a response. But remember, this is not negotiation and there is no obligation to alter your proposed approach. Following a review of the policy and consideration of any comments raised in consultation, It is really important that the pay policy is formally approved and ratified, either by the full governing body or committee, depending on terms of reference. No decisions regarding pay should be taken until the pay policy has been reviewed or updated. Following this, the end-of-year appraisals should be completed and pay recommendations made, either by the appraiser or the head teacher. The final decision regarding who receives a pay increase should be made by whoever has delegated authority in the school to do so. This may be the governing body, a pay committee, or the head teacher, depending on delegation arrangements within your school as set out in the pay policy. All teachers should be provided with a salary statement showing a breakdown of their earnings from the 1st of September each year. This review process should be completed as soon as possible, but given the number of stages involved, it may take several weeks. Any pay increases should always be backdated to the 1st of September. Having looked at the key principles of how the pay policy works, we will now look at the pay increase for 2022. We will look at the pay award process, as every year we are asked why the new pay figures are not available on the 1st of September, which is the date they are due to take effect from. The process is completely outside of every local authority's control, and the timescales are set by central government. The pay review process involves multiple stages. The first stage is for the pay review body to make written recommendations to the government. The government then formally responds and publishes the proposed pay increases, after which follows an 8-week consultation period on any proposed changes. It's really important to note that any changes remain provisional until the Stpcd is published, and schools should not make any decisions about pay until this happens. This year, consultation ended on the 23rd of September, and the draft Stpcd is scheduled to be laid before Parliament on the 14th of October for approval, and it is anticipated it won't officially come into force until the 4th of November. On this slide, you can see the proposed minimum and maximum values for each of the pay ranges. It's important to stress these are provisional and may be subject to change before the Stpcd is published. These are the values for England and Wales. If you're in a fringe area or your teachers attract London weighting, please refer to the Stpcd for the values for these areas. From the 1st of September, it is proposed that the following changes will be applied. A 5% increase to the minimum and maximum values for the upper and leadership pay ranges. A 5% increase to the advisory points for teachers paid on the upper pay range and the range for unqualified teachers where a school chooses to follow these. A 5% increase to the minimum and maximum ranges for TLR and SEN allowances. Higher increases have been announced for teachers in the early stages of their career as follows. Firstly, the starting salary of an ECT will rise by 8.9% to £28,000 per year, as a step towards achieving a minimum starting salary of £30,000 per year by September 2023. Secondly, the advisory points for a main pay range teacher will see an increase of between 5 and 8%. We are awaiting confirmation of the precise values when the Stpcd is published. The advisory pay points for the main, upper and unqualified pay ranges remain. 6 points on the main pay range, 3 on the upper and 10 on the unqualified range. You can see the value of the advisory points on the slide, and we will look at this in more detail shortly. We are also expecting to see retrospective provision in the Stpcd for a 1-day reduction in the total number of teaching days for a full-time teacher as a result of the additional bank holiday for Her Majesty the Queen's state funeral. There are no other changes to terms and conditions. Here is a summary of those changes in a slide for you. So, what do these changes mean in practice? Any teacher paid the minimum value of their pay range should move on to the new minimum value. This is regardless of performance or length of service, as to pay beneath the published range would be a breach of contract. A teacher paid the current minimum may progress above the minimum value where their performance warrants and the pay policy allows. Any teacher paid the maximum of their range may move to the new maximum value where performance warrants, but there isn't the same automatic requirement to move to the new ceiling value as there is at the bottom of the range. Where a teacher is not performing, they may receive no pay increase, depending on the provisions in the pay policy. Any teacher paid between the minimum and maximum values may progress where performance warrants. Any pay progression should be in line with the school's pay policy and be consistent with the framework set out in the policy and the uplift that the school has determined they will apply to salaries within the range from September 2022. In terms of allowances, no teacher may be paid less than the minimum value for allowances. Schools should determine locally what increase to apply to those allowances paid within or at the top of the range, or whether any increase is applied to any recruitment and retention allowances already in payment. We'll now spend a little more time considering the advisory points in more detail. The key thing to emphasise is the fact that they are discretionary. There is no requirement or expectation on the part of the DfE that schools use these. Schools may continue to use non-points-based approaches to pay progression, such as a percentage or cash uplift. They may also use points of other values or have greater or fewer than the 6 main and 3 upper pay range points set out in the Stpcd. No points have been published for the leadership or leading practitioner range. Schools wishing to use points for these ranges will need to determine the value locally and include this in their pay policy. So why did the government resume publishing points? The government has stated that this is to create greater clarity about pay progression expectations, in recognition of some of the confusion that has been in place with regards to pay since mandatory points were removed in 2013. The government has pledged that nationally the starting salary for teachers will increase to £30,000 by September 2023, which requires a significant uplift in teachers' pay this year to meet that requirement. The points are a framework to support schools to achieve this. It is hoped by uplifting starting salaries and by awarding more significant pay uplifts in the early years of teaching that more people will be attracted to and retained within the profession, particularly for early career teachers. Whilst it is likely that points will continue to be published for the foreseeable future, the government is clear at this stage that they will remain advisory only, enabling schools to retain local flexibility and decision-making with regards to pay. Many schools have moved teachers to the advisory points in the last 2 years, but if the school has not done so and now wishes to move teachers to the new advisory points, they need to identify a fair assimilation process to achieve this. No guidance was published by the DfE back in 2020 when the new advisory points were introduced. So schools who have not done this and now wish to do so will need to determine locally how to approach this. The approach and associated costs may differ depending on the framework the school currently uses for pay progression. In assimilating, it's really important to ensure no teacher is at a detriment compared to what they might have expected to receive under the school's current pay policy. They also need to ensure they allow for meaningful and proportionate progression, which recognises and rewards the performance of all teachers at different stages in their career. Importantly, schools should give careful consideration to the financial implications of assimilation and carefully cost out and budget what moving staff to the advisory points looks like in their school. You need to be sure your budget can support these assimilation costs. Given the potential complexities of the assimilation process, you may wish to seek guidance from us or your HR provider. A final point to consider, if, as a school, you choose not to assimilate, is how you plan to meet the £30,000 minimum starting salary by 2023 and allow for meaningful differentials in pay for teachers paid above the minimum. Before we finish, I would like to summarise the next steps for schools in terms of the actions you should take regarding teachers' pay. You should await confirmation of the pay award and publication of the new teachers' salaries before making pay decisions locally. You should then complete the end-of-year appraisals and make pay recommendations. Next, you will want to determine what the pay uplift to be applied in line with the school's own pay policy is. You should then consider whether to assimilate to advisory points. Next, you should review and revise the pay policy, consult with staff and unions on any changes before ratification. You should then provide the teachers with a written pay statement, and you will then want to complete the teacher salary assessment documents to notify your payroll provider. Finally, you should seek guidance from our HR consultancy team on the assimilation process, pay policy changes, or any complex queries you may have. We are at the end of today's session, which I hope has been helpful and informative. Here are the details of some key resources in relation to teachers' pay, and I would encourage you to look at these if you haven't already done so. HRConnect provide a range of pay-related resources to our customers, including a model pay policy and guidance. These are all available via the ServiceNow portal. We are always more than happy to provide guidance and support to schools on all aspects of pay. Contact numbers are on the screen. If you are not currently a customer and need guidance, please do contact us and we'll be happy to have a conversation about the chargeable support we can offer. Thank you for your time.